Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us yet again. We are so thrilled to be continuing to explore all of the many stories that have been told throughout film history. My name is Devorah Governelli.
And I'm Carrie Parker.
And today we wanted to dive into a film that touches on some of the cultural experiences. And that film is Driving Miss Daisy. And that film really does focus very much on the Black experience as well as the Jewish experience, kind of that mid-century range in the southern states, specifically Georgia and Alabama. We see just a little bit happening in Alabama, but most of it takes place in Georgia. It's through the lens, through the eyes of our two main characters. It actually is based on a play that was written in 1987. It was written by Alfred Urey, so a really great playwright. Obviously, it was very well received because it was only 2 years later that it was produced into the film version. And as far as my research, as of at least last year, it's the most recent PG rated film to actually win Oscar title for best film. So
nice.
A classic, still a classic to this day. Morgan Freeman plays Hoke. He played it in the original Broadway version on stage live, and then he was brought over along with Jessica Tandy, who plays Miss Daisy. They, of course, this play has been revived a few times. One of the more recent times was with the incredible James Earl Jones. They brought it back in 2013. They filmed it in 2014. So just like in like with Hamilton, with Newsies, with Frozen, if your life structure makes it a little challenging time and or money-wise to go see Broadway live, there are awesome versions out there where you can see them online. And Driving Miss Daisy in 2014, they recorded with James Earl Jones, and it was Miss Angela Lansbury that played Miss Daisy.
Love that we have Dan Aykroyd in it.
Yeah, he does a great job.
Yeah.
It's wild to watch because this story, it starts in 1948. But it spans a little over 3 decades. It ends in kind of the early 70s. So one of my favorite things is watching, it actually won Best Makeup. And I believe it's mainly because of Dan Aykroyd, and I think also some of the work they did on Jessica Tandy and Morgan Freeman. But I feel like Dan Aykroyd's was, of course, the most noticeable because he's the character that starts younger at the beginning of the film. So that contrast is more visible. And gosh, what a phenomenal job he did. It's giving us a snapshot of the history of our country, and it's not just for our benefit so that we can remember that this happened and work on repairing the fact that these things have happened in our country. It also, for the original artist, for the original writer, these usually tend to also be them processing emotion. So this is actually this play is considered part of what is now called the Atlanta trilogy, taking it back to our UCF theater days, and when we had to sit through a semester of drama literature 1, which went all back, all the way back to all the ancient Greek works, and then we sat through all of the semester with drama lit 2, and that took us up to works like Driving Miss Daisy. I do remember this being on our syllabus, and that Atlantic trilogy Arthur wrote that. It was also including The Last Night of Ballyhoo, which had to do with actual events that happened at the premiere of Gone with the Wind in 1939 in that area. And the third one in that trilogy was called Parade, and that was also based on a historical event. And then we see in this one the historical event of Martin Luther King is winning his Nobel Peace Prize, and so you have Miss Daisy who gets tickets to go see and hear his words live. Hoke does not come in with her, but he is technically there right outside the building, and he's listening to it on the radio. But the Parade film was to touch on the trial and eventual lynching of Leo Frank. And he was a young Jewish man growing up in the South. So writing this play is a part of how he and the other two, how he could process through the emotions and the experiences. And, it becomes a healthy outlet for processing trauma and trying to understand things that happened. And this one in particular was very heavily influenced by the fact that he did have a grandmother who was Jewish, and she did reach a point in her life where she also needed a chauffeur. So he was witnessing this firsthand as a young man. And so again, his way to process the things he experienced was to write. And so this play is what happened. And then, of course, the film version makes it so much more accessible to so many more of us. And a film like this is a valuable tool in our homes because we can sit and we can discuss the thing as it happens. Film has the power to do that, where
Yes.
it can help us open dialogues and have those discussions. The adage of history is doomed to repeat itself, if we don't remember, if we forget it. And so we have to make sure that we don't forget that these things happen, because I say it a lot, healing can only start once a story has been told, and we can only make sure we move forward and don't repeat those things.
When the synagogue is bombed, and she said, "Who would do such a thing?" And Hoke says, "Miss Daisy, you and I both know it's always the same people." And that is so sadly, horrifically true. And it is genuinely a concept, and it's an unfortunately delusional concept that some people possess about skin color or being born to a certain location or being born, etc., to certain circumstances somehow makes you more worthy of freedom, liberty, respect, empathy than other people. And that is just wildly untrue. And again, within my career field, it's a struggle and it's a battle, and part of that multicultural competency is being able to really truly see it and understand it in all of the different ways that it's occurring. And one of them also, which is so, you can see Miss Daisy get uncomfortable every single time she's confronted by my voice.
Because something that big is very hard to accept even today. We saw it when we were in junior high school, and being taught about what happened in World War II and the amount of peers who did not believe it. We're seeing it still with the generations that continue on. So she really does represent the challenge it can be to accept.
But I think specifically, like, her role in it is why, like, when she genuinely gets uncomfortable when she realizes she is part of the problem. And the idea that Hoke in the cemetery admits to her that he can't read, and she's just like, "Stop it.
Yeah.
Stop. Don't tell me that."
She just can't
And she
fathom
literally,
a grown human.
that's literal denial. She's like, "No, that information doesn't exist. Don't tell me that." Just like she does when the synagogue is bombed, and he's like, "We're not going to speak about it."
She says, maybe the police lied. Like, maybe they lied to you. And Hope has to be like, why would they do, like,
yes.
No, that's
even though literally,
but again, acceptance
yes,
so hard.
That acceptance of reality.
When we hit that scene with the bombing of the synagogue, and you can see she's going through all those processes, right? And what is usually the first step in those processing? Denial. She is hardcore in the stage of denial.
Yep. Grief is,
and yes, because she's now has to go through the stages of grief, because she just had a place that is sacred and precious to her destroyed in one of the most vicious ways. And of course, she's asking all the right questions. Is somebody hurt? And Hoke is just sitting there essentially he sees the denial. Mm-hmm. So you can see him doing I don't know what to do in this situation. So he shares a story with her, speaking of the little stories they share with each other that move their relationship forward.
But let's also, before that, which is interesting, because I want to make sure I know what story you're about to mention.
Of course.
That the reality is, when he mentions the synagogue getting bombed, she's like, we're not going to talk about it, because she doesn't want the emotions to happen. She doesn't want to cry. So then they drive away, because he has to break it to her. You're not going to temple today or anytime soon. But they drive away, and he tells her a story.
So the story that he shares is from an experience very young in his childhood. He says he was 10 or 11 years old, and a grown human shouldn't have had to have the experience that he shares, but the fact that he is at the age he is very massive. And he talks about having a friend that he had been hanging out with the day before, and hanging out with the friend's dad, and having this, great childhood moment of we're playing a game, we're playing horseshoes. The dad is telling us how we're going to grow up to be big and strong and have strong arms, just like him. And on this day that he's recalling, which is the day after that event, he is going past a tree and he sees this father hanging in the tree. And he goes as far as to describe the flies that are swarming around his body and that his hands are tied behind his back. And again, a grown human shouldn't have that experience, but he's recalling being 10 or 11 years old and having that experience. And I think what's so horrible about that story is that that is a story that has been lived by many citizens of our country from that time period that he's recalling. And she, of course, does this.
Yeah.
She puts her handkerchief up to her face and starts crying. And why would you tell me that story? And he even says, I don't know. It's just what came to my mind as we're talking about this bombing that just occurred at the synagogue. And he's saying, you know, like you said, it's the same type of people that would have done this. They did this. And this was just a very real part of life. And it was life experiences that no one should have ever had, but they did.
And what I genuinely love about that moment is she is crying and he says, go ahead and cry, Miss Daisy, because I feel like he knew, but also I feel like that's exactly why he told her, because he saw the denial about the synagogue. He saw her do her very prim, proper, I am a strong, assertive female and I have my own autonomy and all of those things that her mother's generation fought for her to have, that she is now a grown woman who has an adult son trying to hang on to that, trying to maintain that autonomy and carry
dignity.
And that's why the denial, because she wants to prove she has resilience and she is strong and she will not be taken down by this, which is such a real feeling. But again, he had that moment of parallel situations that their cultures, their races had experienced, that he told her the story, and she was able to cry through that story. And again, that's what cinema therapy is. That's what bibliotherapy is. It's a way for individuals to watch an outside story, connect and relate and experience the emotions related to similar concepts or events without the full-on trauma of having to bring up our own stuff and rehash. And so
maybe even look at it more clearly.
So in the most amazing and empathetic and empowering of ways, he gave her that excuse to cry without her having to do that over her own experience, but he gave her an experience.
Yeah, that hopefully could help her to see. I think it also was intended to show her you're not alone. I know that what you're feeling right now is devastating. And it's, you know, something you don't really ever get over. You can process through it and get to a better state, but you don't really ever get over that. And I think he's also trying to share with her, I understand. I understand that level of destruction. I understand what it is to have to try to live with that going forward. And by the time we get to the end of this story, she looks right at him and she's like, you know, Hoke, I think you're my best friend. Because she, you know, we see throughout the film, she has her little group of friends, and that's great. Like, she's got positive, healthy social interactions. But it's also that, sure, she's in these, you know, relationships with these other females that are her peers, and she's having positive social interactions, but she, I think, never is as vulnerable in front of them. And so when she says, Hope, you're my best friend, I think it's really her acknowledging,
so true.
Sure, I've had a lot of great female friends. We've gotten together and played games and read books and crafted, and it's been great. I've sat in the synagogue next to my gal pals, but none of them have ever really seen like the full side of me. No one has really ever seen the deepest, darkest corners of who I am the way you have. It's like her acknowledging that, and he has been so patient with her through all of her crotchety behavior. She's just so bristly so often, and he's still just very patient with her. Obviously, part of it is he has to be. Although, kudos to him, at one point he goes to have a conversation with Dan Aykroyd, and he does the, yeah, someone else offered me a job and it pays so much more money. And Dan Aykroyd like catches on right away.
He sees it and he's like, oh,
But
really?
He still acknowledges his value,
Yeah.
and he still acknowledges, I really need you to do this job, and he gives him a raise. I'm like, yes, advocating for yourself. Like,
Yes.
he just, Morgan Freeman's character, Hoke, just shows
Does very well.
to be such a classy, strong, incredible human who is just patient and filled with grace and giving. And, Miss Daisy reaches that point in her life where she can finally see it and she can acknowledge it together,
That
and
they
they
can be
can commiserate
companions.
together on the way their people are targeted.
And it's especially huge with systemic oppression because, sorry, not sorry to admit, guys, that it still exists today, whether you want to believe it or not, but I've seen it firsthand in the reality
It's
of
in your job every day.
when I worked in a prison and I was advised by my supervisor that when presenting information to my population, please understand some of them dropped out at very early ages. And so trying to make the information that we're presenting accessible and understandable, no matter the education level. I love when we have those strong male, especially in historic fiction or historic inspired by true event stories that really show that factor, that no matter the oppressive system, the idea that you can't stop people from being smart. Just because you don't let them have access to education does not mean they are not intelligent, smart, or clever and able to figure your stuff out.
And I agree. I love the way that that's presented here because you have that one little moment, again, as you can see their relationship is starting to actually strengthen. And one of those first moments is, like you were referring to earlier, when she discovers in the graveyard, she tells him to go look for a name, and he's like, I can't. And what a revelation that is. And so by the time we get to Christmas time, a little while later, she gives him this little booklet wrapped up, and it's one of those primers that would have been very standard in the education system back then in the 50s, early 50s.
Yes.
And she said, I just had some extra ones lying around from when I used to teach. And then again, speaking to her very prim and proper reputation boundary self, she's very insistent on specifying, this is not a Christmas present. I'm not giving you a
no
gift.
place giving Christmas presents. Like,
Which is-
I feel like that's
I
so
thought
adorable.
That's the perfect excuse. Like, we all know your motivation for saying that. It might be something a little different, but
probably,
you know what? That excuse works. You don't celebrate Christmas, so of course it's not a Christmas present. But that should be our takeaway from her. Because we have to acknowledge that it could be easy for any one of us to be exactly like Miss Daisy and close our eyes to what is literally going on around us. I think that every time I'm in an airport or rest stop restroom and I see the signs posted on the mirrors of the bathrooms that talk about if you are a victim of human trafficking.
I love you.
And it gives resources. There are people who live in our country who are in a reality where they don't think that happens anymore. I appreciate that when I walk out of my gym in the morning, there's a big sign with a giant QR code that says, are you experiencing mental health challenges? Are you having suicidal thoughts? And that just right in the lobby of my gym, there is acknowledgement that we're going through tough things. And there are resources out there. And that is really what we should be taking away from Miss Daisy, is that we don't want to close our eyes. We don't want to put our blinders on. I mean, I'm not saying that we all have to sit here and save the whole world, because no human can do it all. But what we can try to do is try to do our part. Let's not continue to contribute to the systemic oppressions that still exist in our very communities, whether we are happy about them or not, whether we want to acknowledge them or not, whether we feel like we can do anything or not. Let's not contribute to them. And if there is some small part you can play, maybe you're in a zone of life where you can just give a donation to a foundation. Maybe you're in a chapter of life where you can do volunteer hours. Whatever that might look like, maybe you're able to help one individual, like with the Big Brother, Big Sister program. There are outlets out there to help contribute to our societies and our communities, so that rather than being Miss Daisies, we can be Hokes, who, like you just said, can look at the world realistically, but still try to approach life with positivity and still try to make connections and still take care of yourself and others.
Yeah.
You know, let's be, Miss Daisy is a fun character to watch, but let's try to channel more of Hoke in our daily actions for sure. Well, thank you everyone for joining us yet again on this very emotional episode. It's driving Miss Daisy. It is literally impossible to not be emotional, and part of it is knowing it's part of our country's past. Part of it is the way that it kind of draws me back to the stories I heard about from my family growing up, between my grandmother fighting Nazis, between the stories I heard from my mom and auntie about kind of their household growing up. But so I get extra emotional, I feel like, because of that connection. But I hope that we can all get some good, valuable takeaways from it, use it to inspire and motivate us to put our best selves into our communities and just help continue to make them better places as we go through our own personal adventures.
Yeah.
Well, definitely we'd love to hear from you. Comment. Have you seen this film? Do you like the Morgan Freeman and Jessica Tandy version more? Or do you like the stage version with James Earl Jones and Angela Lansbury? Have you watched neither of them and you need to go watch both right now? Let us know, what would you like to talk about with us? We're just so grateful to keep chatting stories. And all
Frankie has all sorts of opinions.
He would love to contribute to the comment section as well.
Oh, he does. He does. The peanut gallery. Dear goodness. Anyways, thank you guys so much. We will see you next time.
Yes. Bye, guys.